We received the official summary from the FAA on the Safety Risk Management Panel that was convened to study the use of the North Runway Post OMP buildout. As you will recall, the FAA Administrator Rebecca McPherson presented this information to the Fly Quiet Committee at our December meeting. The letter states that the panel determined that the risk associated with the nighttime arrivals of 9 center, 27 center, and 9 right, 27 left, and planes crossing those runways to be at an acceptable risk within the National Airspace System. Those runways runways would be able to operate using current air traffic control rules and available procedures. If any members have any questions about this, please let Jeanette know and she will address them with the FAA. Number 6, we're on number 6 now. Interim Fly Quiet weekly report. There will be a discussion. We are up to the week 23 of the IFQ, nearing the end of the first round of runway rotation program before construction of 4 right, 27 left, which begins later this spring. The program is expected to resume in September of this year. I will ask Ryan to give us a recap on weekly IFQ reports since our last meeting. Ryan?
Good morning, everyone. So I'm going to share my screen and bring up the weekly reports for weeks 16 through 23. I'm not going to go through all the weeks in detail, but I do want to highlight a few of the reports, specifically right off the bat for week 16, which started week of February 16th, which was a diagonal week with the primary configuration being arrivals on 22 right and departures on 22 left. And you can see we had 53% utilization of the diagonal runways for that period, which is much better than we were seeing in previous months. And that's with, we had inclement weather and FAA maintenance on 2 of the nights. So if you see the back page, we actually had 2 nights where we weren't really able to use those runways at all. So even with that, we saw 53% utilization. So a much better utilization of the diagonals for week 16. Week 17, we were back on parallels, 56% utilization of those runways. Week 18, back on the diagonals, was 50%. We only had 1 night of inclement weather, which was good. This was reverse primary, 4 left departures, 4 right arrivals. So average operations during Fly Quiet was 91, which is what we're typically seeing, 90 to 100 operations. And we were in West Flow 100% of the time, so that we were able to stay in that primary configuration for the entire week. Week 19, parallel configuration, 63% utilization. We did have several nights of construction on one of our primary runways, 10 center, which resulted in not full use of the configuration for the week. Week of March 15th was week 20, diagonal week, down again to 35%. However, we had inclement weather on 3 of the nights. You'll see on the back page, 3 of the nights we weren't able to use the diagonal runways at all due to weather conditions. Week 21 was week of March 22nd, back to parallels, 53% utilization of the parallel runways, 27 left arrivals, 28 center departures. We did have, again, some rubber removal on our primary departure runway, 28 center, along with some inclement weather on the night of the 22nd. Week 22, week of March 29th, diagonals, 22 right arrivals, 22 left departures. Again, we had inclement weather on the nights of the 29th and April 4th. Or sorry, April 3rd, which drove our utilization down to 28% for the week. And then this is the other one I wanted to highlight, week 23. This is our most recent report for the week of April 5th. You can see we had 93% utilization of the primary and secondary configurations, arrival on 10 center and departure on 28 right. A couple things I want to highlight here. One, the 93%. This goes to show we're never going to reach 100% utilization of our rotation configurations, because every week we're going to have to shut down each runway for safety inspection. So every night runways get shut down so that CDA operations can inspect those runways. So we're never going to get 100%, but this is about as close as we're going to get to 100%. 93% is very good utilization. Also, if you look at the start and stop times, this really highlights how demand drives the start and stop times of flight quiet. So this is the week of April 5th. Obviously, we are into the effects of the COVID pandemic and the drastic reductions in operations that we're seeing at O'Hare. And you can see with that vastly reduced demand, we are able to start flight quiet at 10, right at the beginning of nighttime, and average stop time was all the way to 6:30 a.m. So this is by far, this week was the longest average period that we're able to stay in flight quiet, and one of the highest utilizations. Again, mostly driven by demand and the decrease in demand that we're seeing. We're also in west flow 90% of the time, so we're able to use that primary configuration pretty steadily throughout the week. And that completes the summary of the IFQ runway rotation reports for weeks 16 through 23.
Are there any questions for Ryan? If not, we'll move on.
Okay, so
Number 7.
Yep, go ahead.
Ryan, let me say something first, okay? Thank you. Review of flight quiet committee decision process. I know we have been seeing this chart pretty much in the same state for quite some time now. We have asked that it be reconfigured to focus on decisions that need to be made by the committee in order for the process to move forward. I'll ask Ryan to walk us through this. I think this is critical because we've been talking in generalities, and it's time to start getting specific as to where we're going with all this. So, Ryan, do it.
Okay. So we're all very familiar with this slide. I'm not going to really talk to this too much. We've been kind of at this point for a while now at the developing, improving alternatives. But we wanted to kind of give a different view of what our decision process is, or your decision process. So we came up with this graphic that shows the steps we need to get to an approved flight quiet 21 plan. So at the bottom of the pyramid, you'll see we've already kind of, our beginning process was establish goals, what the committee wants to accomplish, and how the guiding principles that the committee wants us to follow as we develop these alternatives. And then we developed and approved the criteria. We had 8 flight quiet 21 criteria for us to follow for developing these alternatives. And that was developed and approved back in November of 2018. Since then, we've been working on taking a look at runway configurations, departure procedures, and we're at a point where now we have this concept of RNAV departures that the committee, we need direction on whether or not they want to pursue that as a potential concept to include in possible alternatives for Flight 21. We can't really move forward with alternatives until we get this decision made. The FAA has voiced their commitment to committing resources for helping us develop these procedures, RNAV procedures, but they have indicated that they really need some sort of indication from the committee that this is what they want to pursue. So without that in place, we're not really able to refine these procedures and get them to a point where we can show you how they might work and put them into an alternative where we can show impacts and compare that to other alternatives. Once we get this past this procedure or decision, we'll be developing multiple alternatives. And when I say alternatives, they're going to be kind of packaged programs where we'll have schedules, runway configurations, departure procedures, and we can have multiple of those alternatives for the committee to deliberate on, to kind of modify, take a look at, see what they like and don't like, until we get to a point where the committee feels comfortable that they have a preferred alternative that we can have the committee recommend and proceed to a full ONCC commission approval. So that's kind of how we see the steps leading towards approval of a program for this committee. Are there any questions regarding the process and where we're at?
Doesn't seem to be any. Thank you. Frank, I didn't realize that your hand was up when you wanted to speak on when you were on number 4, I should say. So do you mind if we wait until after the agenda and you'll get a chance to speak?
Sure, absolutely. It was no big deal.
I apologize.
No, that's okay. Listen, as long as I have the microphone for 1 second, can we ask everyone to please turn off their kitchen sink? It's very disturbing. We can barely hear the speaker over the background noise of someone.
Yeah, whatever that was, it's gone. All right, very good. All right, now we're going to be going to item 8, runway utilization summary. As you would recall, at our last meeting, it was requested by Mr. Summers that the technical committee take a closer look at runway utilization during IFQ to determine whether it is feasible to include diagonal runways in the Fly Quiet 21 runway rotation plan. In order to get through all of the business we have before us today, I'm going to limit this agenda item to a maximum of 15 minutes, and we'll be getting back to this item in subsequent meetings. Evan?
Thanks, Joe. Good summary of how we got here. We are all aware of the fact that IFQ is the first time we have attempted a runway rotation during the winter months, and we knew that weather would have an impact on the use of diagonals. In some of the weeks where diagonals were the primary configuration, we have only seen usage of the primary configuration in the mid 20%. I wanted to get a better understanding of why this is taking place. Is this truly weather driven, or is it due to the preference of pilots and or airlines to use the longer runways? I also wanted to understand what the solutions we may have to improve the use of diagonals. I'm going to ask Ryan to share the presentation he provided to technical committee last week, and then we can discuss briefly. Ryan?
Okay, let me pull that up. So as Evan summarized, we did an analysis of diagonal runway utilization during IFQ and compared that to tests 2 and 3. As we've discovered during the winter months, the IFQ utilization of our diagonal runways has not been that great, especially when we look at the numbers from test 2 and 3. And one of the things that stood out was weather, the difference in weather. The test 2 and 3 took place during warmer months, summer, and whereas IFQ right now, we have been in winter months. And so if you look at the chart on the left, you can see overall utilization of diagonal runways was averaging around 37% versus what we saw in test 2 and 3, 53%. If we take out all the days or nights, I should say, that were affected by weather, then we see a much closer average than we saw in tests 2 and 3. So that tells us weather is having a significant impact on utilization of diagonal runways. We also looked at weather overall. During IFQ, 39% of the nights were restricted due to weather during IFQ during the weeks of November 3rd through March 22nd. And we have been primarily in a west flow configurations due to those seasonal westerly winds that we typically see in December and January. Test 2 and 3, we only saw 15% of the nights restricted due to weather, and a much more even split of west flow and east flow with 53% and 47%. We also looked at utilization of short runways, and when I say short runways, there are 7,500 foot runways at O'Hare during daytime to see what the fleet mix of aircraft at O'Hare that are using the shorter runways that are similar in length to our diagonals. And you can see the vast majority of the fleet mix that are using those runways are regional and narrow body aircraft. However, there is a very small percentage of wide bodies that do use those runways or have used those runways. And we just highlighted that to show that although that's not really a significant percentage of wide bodies, but it is possible for some wide bodies to use the shorter runways for arrivals and departures. It really depends on the aircraft and where their origin and destination and the weather, and more specifically the weight of the aircraft. But it's not a hard, fast rule that wide body aircraft can't use the shorter runways. And then you'll see on pages 7 and 8 kind of a closer look at what those wide body operations were. Diagonal weeks, we also looked at the average flight quiet operations on parallel runways. This really highlighted how the demand of arrivals and departures drove the operations transitioning from diagonal runways to parallel runways. So these are, if you look at this chart, the green is IFQ, the blue is test 2 and 3. These are average flight quiet mode operations that should have been on the diagonal runways because we were scheduled to be on those runways, but operated on parallel runways. And you can see the peaks, especially for IFQ in the morning and 5 a.m. Those are typically, that's our arrival peak. And so those are arrivals that are transitioning from our diagonals going to a parallel configuration, which is our typical daytime configuration. So that's a mix of runway. We have a parallel runway open that's available for the pilots to request, and pilots are requesting to use those runways as we get into the morning hours. So that's something we've looked at. We talked about in the tech committee meeting. Pilots are welcome to make requests for alternative runways, assuming the runway is open and safe to use, and air traffic it is not their protocol to deny those requests, nor is it protocol for the pilot to document the reason for his request. So unfortunately, all a pilot has to do is request an alternative runway, and assuming that runway is open and available for use and it's safe to use it, that request will be granted. And so you can see the breakout of regional and narrow body aircraft that were operating on the parallels when they should have been operating on the diagonals. And vast majority are United American and SkyWest, which is a regional carrier that operates for both American and United. And so these are kind of if we were to do outreach, these are the groups that we would want to target the airline, and more specifically the chief pilots, to get the word down the line to the line pilots that the importance of this program, why we're doing it, and why possibly requesting alternative runway, just make sure that it's absolutely necessary for the safe operation of the aircraft and not maybe out of convenience. So our conclusion analysis was really 3 things. Diagonal runway utilization is heavily impacted by weather during the winter months. We do see wide body aircraft use the shorter runway lengths during daytimes, which tells us some can use them during nighttime. And we really need to do more outreach to the airlines to improve the rotation utilization.
Brian, it's Evan. I've got another thing we uncovered though in tech I want to put out there for everybody, is you touched on it, is that pilots can request the use of a runway if it's open. What we uncovered in tech committee was Chicago may be willing to broach the idea of closing runways down at nighttime, which would therefore push the pilots to other runways. Effectively, we could use, by closing certain runways down, we could rotate the use of the parallel runways. Is that correct?
Well, I believe Aaron, you feel free to chime in here. Aaron specifically said that it's something the city is willing to look into. However, there are, as far as I'm aware, implications of, we would have to really talk to the carriers and air traffic to see if that's feasible. to not have a parallel long runway open when we're in diagonal.
Well, I think we're talking about possibly closing down a 13,000 foot runway while leaving 10,000 foot plus runways.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's definitely something we should pursue with the carriers and air traffic to see if that's feasible.
Okay, and then a couple other things. I think the big takeaway is, from my standpoint, it's worthwhile to leave the diagonal runways in the mix for runway rotation. We always wanted to maximize the amount of runways available. Leaving diagonals in makes that possible. I think there are still some things around the edges that we can fix. We can, do the conclusion items you have. We can work with Chicago on potentially closing the 13,000 foot runway. We can look at assigning a third runway for when we're in a diagonal configuration. And then also, my favorite thing, we can still look at fly quiet awards to reward the airlines that follow the fly quiet procedures.
Evan, I have a question, maybe a request. Is it possible for your committee to talk to SkyWest and to talk to United through Ryan or through somebody to find out why they're doing what they're doing? Why
I
those
have no problem with technical committee being the fly quiet police.
Can I make a suggestion?
Yeah.
SkyWest, Ryan, where are most of SkyWest airplanes coming out of? T3?
Ryan, you're muted.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's a mix because they operate both for United and American.
So what's their closest departure runway at night? Is it going to be 10 left to 8?
It could be either a north runway or a south runway. I don't know off the top of my head.
So you're a pilot. Which one are you going to take? I'm not trying to be weird here, but we keep dancing around this issue of why do they want the longest runway? I think we've got to come to grips with the fact that a pilot, if he has a choice, he's going to take the longest piece of real estate he can find. And especially during the winter time, because the de-icing pad is now on the south airfield. So he's going to go get de-iced, and he's going to take off from the longest piece of real estate he can find. And also the one that's the closest to where he just got de-iced at. I don't understand why we keep going back and forth as to why they want to use a 13,000 foot runway. If I still had my pilot certificate, I'll tell you what one I'd want to use. I'd want to use the longest piece of real estate I could find.
Ernie, what we're getting into now is a discussion that will happen in the future. Can we make that question of yours rhetorical until we get to that issue?
Joe, you know me well enough to know it's rhetorical because we're going to keep coming back to this issue as long as we can, and to ask the city, Aaron, to ask CDA to close a 13,000 foot runway in the essence of safety is ludicrous, quite frankly, and I think we've got to come to grips with it, Joe. I'm sorry. When we make the two runways on the north airfield 11,000 feet and change, then okay, yeah, close the south runway. Whatever. But until we get to that point, to say that we're going to tell a pilot that he's not allowed to use a 13,000 foot runway when he wants to use it, I think we're kidding ourselves. And I think it's a safety issue.
Ernie, can we wait for that conclusion when it comes from the pilots? Because we are going to be talking about this in the future. I totally understand Joe. What you're talking about, like everybody else does. But I think what we were supposed to do today is just here to report from the technical committee and move on to RNAV, because that's what we're talking about today. We will have we're going to have discussions that'll probably take meetings long to get through this issue. I suspect that.
Then Joe, as chair, I will ask that I will table my discussion on that. But the other topic is And Ryan, here's a question I've got, and if you'll allow me, Chair.
Yes.
On those days, Ryan, on those days, do we have any meteorological evidence of what the crosswind component was that caused half the people, 45 operations, right? If we have an operational night of 90 ops, and so 45 flights decided I got to take the long runway. Do we know, was there a meteorological condition that there was a crosswind component that didn't allow them to take off on a 7,500-foot runway?
We have not looked at that specifically, no.
Right.
But I would like to clarify a couple things though before we move on. One, the central de-icing pad is actually central to the airfield, so it is kind of in the middle on the west end, central to both the north and south runways. And two, we do close the 13,000-foot 10 left 28 right runway every night for an hour or more for safety inspection. So it's not unthinkable to close that runway, and you have to use other runways while that runway is being inspected.
Okay, Ernie, there
And
are
that's
other.
and that's right now, even without the north runways being extended or completed, that are going to be over 11,000 feet.
Ernie, there are other questions, hands that are raised, so let me get to them before we go on, okay? Dan Dwyer, you're first.
Yes, just from the presentation to try and better understand the problem, the slide that shows the parallel runway utilization in the diagonal weeks, and where you see that the higher utilization, mainly from about 12 a.m. to 5 a.m., the green bars. Is there anything in the percentages in the following slides that equate those green bars to wide body aircraft specifically?
Good question. I don't think we have a specific slide that highlights the parallel. You can see that there is some, I guess this slide here, slide 11, we have the fleet mix of the parallel runways during diagonal weeks, and you can see the percentage overall. 32% was wide body, and then when we take out weather restrictions, that was 40%. So still the vast majority of those operations were regional and narrow body, over 50, almost 60%.
Okay.
All right, next is Karen.
I'm good. I don't need to speak anymore. Thank you, though.
Okay, Alderman Dunn.
Yeah, just a clarification question. It was mentioned possibly closing runways at night, and I would like a clarification on that. I'm under the assumption that some runways are closed during the night. I don't think the pilots and the airlines have the flexibility and the discretion to take off from any runway they want, say the far north and south ones, and land on any runway that they would like. So maybe you can clarify that.
Yeah, that's a good point. So every night the city holds responsibility for which runways are open and closed, and every night they close runways either due to a noise abatement program like we have here, or safety inspections or other reasons. So every night multiple runways get closed. The far north runway, far south runway get closed, and also other runways close for noise abatement. The pilots, when they make a request, if they need to request a runway that is closed, that is much more of a significant request than one where we have a runway open. When we were in tests 1, 2, and 3, the FAA, we initially had the long runway closed, and then we would open it up for a 2-hour request. It was after discussions when we tried that with air traffic and the airlines, that wasn't really working at the time, and so we agreed to have a long runway open every night, that being 10 left, 28 right, when we're not scheduled to use that runway.
All right. We have 2 more people that wish to speak in that. What I would like to do is close off the discussion after these last 2, because we're going to have plenty of time to be talking about this in the future. We've got other agenda items. So Evan, you're next.
No, thank you.
Okay. And lastly, Ernie?
I'm good, Joe. Thank you.
All right.
Joe, I have my hand up, Malcolm Chester.
Oh, you do? Okay. Sorry, Malcolm. Go on.
I was trying to get clarification. You said incentives to use the diagonal. What does that mean? In your discussion, I don't know.
I believe that was Evan's suggestion that we maybe do some sort of awards program or some sort of highlighting those carriers that have really good utilization of the rotation program. Give them a gold star every quarter or year, something like that. Evan, I don't want to speak for you.
If I could add something, I was on the tech committee when we did this years ago for using the ground run-ups, and it actually was effective, believe it or not. The big airlines seem to be interested in getting a gold star.
They do like to, tout that, and that's something that they use in PR. So it definitely has an effect.
Okay. I just wanted clarification of what those incentives.
Yeah, so it would be a award system rather than a carrot rather than a stick. I've dug out an old report that I commissioned a while ago, and San Francisco does this, Seattle Tacoma does it, Vancouver does it. So I think there's a model out there that we can look up and follow.
All right, thank you. If we may continue now with agenda item number 9, RNAV departure procedures. Now that we have a clearer understanding of the use of diagonal runways during IFQ, we have reached a point where we need to start making decisions as to whether or not to proceed with exploring the use of RNAV procedures. I would like for the committee to vote on this for this matter today so the CDA can move forward with developing runway rotation plans for consideration at our next meeting. Today's vote is not a decision one way or another on the use of RNAV procedures. It is just to determine whether the committee wants to use our RNAV procedures in a potential configuration for future consideration. We have a presentation on this subject. We had a presentation on this subject in a meeting, and a vote was tabled until further information regarding the diagonal runway usage was given. I hope we can proceed with the vote today. In the minutes, I noticed there wasn't an actual motion, so I'd like to condense the motion and reiterate it and ask it to be taken off the table for the vote. The motion is the Fly Quiet Committee of the ONCC requests that the City of Chicago Department of Aviation pursue further studies of RNAV departure concepts to be included as possible options for consideration as part of Fly Quiet 21 plan. Once we make a decision on whether or not the committee wants to pursue this option, the CDA can provide more analysis for us on things like scenarios, population impacts, and flight tracks. That's a long motion. Do I have a second for that?
I'll second
We
it.
have a motion and second. And now
I'll second.
all right. Thank you. I'm opening it up for discussion. Ryan, is there anything you want to say? Oh, I'm sorry, Evan.
So I am going to be opposed to RNAV being part of Fly Quiet 21. My reason for that is I think what we're dealing with in a runway rotation plan is complicated enough. I think we need to keep our eye on the ball and get that rotation plan in place. And if a committee wants to tackle RNAV down the road, I don't think that it is part and parcel to having a runway rotation plan. But at this time, I did not think RNAV is appropriate.
All right.
Hi, Joe. Can I be recognized? This is Nunzio from Wooddale.
Yes.
Yeah, I will agree with Evan and Bensonville. We need the rotation. And again, are we trying to set the vector headings right now? Is that what we're trying to do? I'm a little confused.
No. What we're doing is just giving the giving the CDA directive to look into the use of RNAV. Not that we're going to use it, but just this is a long process, and they need time to develop this so that they're given an opportunity to develop these potential plans, which may or may not actually happen. It's just giving them a green light to go ahead to look. That's all it is.
Yeah, but I thought we're already doing, and I apologize. This is the second time I use this Zoom, and you don't have the hand raising and all that stuff for video.
Yeah,
But
Mayor.
I thought we were already working on vector headings, and we're talking about PBNs and RNAV, but we're trying to get to a rotation, which I think one of the members just mentioned. Well, the 11,000 runways are not ready yet, so eventually they're going to have those other options.
I think it's my understanding that it's easier to give the go-ahead for RNAV and then start talking about different types of plans so that RNAV could be or not be incorporated into them. That's my understanding.
Yeah, Mayor, Mayor Police, we have further work to do on RNAV development of those procedures. And in order to commit the resources to do that, the CDA and the FAA just need to get a good idea that this commission is interested in pursuing that. Once we if we do get that commitment, then we'll move forward with refining those procedures and developing them and bringing them into alternatives for this committee to deliberate. That's along with the vector headings that we've been looking at as well. If the committee decides not to pursue RNAV as a potential procedure, then the alternatives moving forward that we would show would only be vector headings.
So, but that's it. Why are we taking things off the table? I mean, I thought we're looking at everything. Maybe I'm a little confused right now, but and not used to the Zoom video stuff. But
I think the reason why it's being taken off the table is to begin to focus the group. That's all it is. Because if we decide to have them pursue RNAV possibilities, that's a focus. That's something that they're being asked to do, right? If we tell them not to pursue RNAV, that's also a focus on where we're headed toward utilization of runways.
Nope.
Yes. Oh, no, wait, you know what? Malcolm, I got to start taking guys in order. Dan's next, then Alderman Dunn, then Mayor Jersey, and then you. Okay. All right?
Thank you. I guess our concern with the RNAV is we understand it's operationally feasible, but whether the FAA assistance would actually involve comparison of the noise, something to equate to what's a reportable or significant noise impact for a vector versus RNAV. Do we have an understanding as to whether the FAA would go into that level of depth, or is this just from an operational standpoint?
Right now, this is just an operational standpoint from the FAA committing resources to develop the procedures themselves. As far as noise impacts, that's something that we would look at down the road once we have the procedures refined and making sure that they're flyable with the FAA. Then we can start looking at noise impacts. And that's something we can do initially for this committee, but ultimately the FAA, they will not look at noise impacts until the environmental approval process, which would be after this committee approves a alternative, and then it goes to the full commission for approval, and then is officially submitted by the CDA. So we can look at preliminary impacts and what we think might be the noise created by these procedures, but any official FAA environmental process would include a full analysis of noise impacts along with all the other environmental impacts.
Okay, and I guess just a follow-up then, if the noise analysis wouldn't be done until a proposed draft EIS, would the committee have an opportunity to review that and consider that at that point in case there were unintended impacts?
the committee as well as the public at whole has an opportunity to comment. I don't believe there's a mechanism for this committee to kind of renege on the a proposal after it's been submitted by CDA once they look at the impacts. But there is a significant comment portion of the environmental approval process that is open to the public. We went through that for the IFQ approval. So I think that would be heavily considered if the ONCC has strong opposition to a program once they see the official impacts, environmental impacts that the FAA produces.
Okay, thank you.
But it's hard for me, again, it's hard, you know, I can't say that just this committee would have the ability to stop the program.
Okay, thanks.
All right, Alderman Dunn.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Issue of RNAV, I think there is, I'm sure the technical possibility that that would be examined, and it's proven to be not recommended or infeasible at some point in the future, but I don't think it's prudent to take that option off the table at this point. RNAV has some, what appears to be some strong benefits to better take advantage of compatible land uses on departures, and there are some drawbacks to it with the repetitiveness of the flight pattern. But I think at this point, Elmhurst would support continuing to look at that as a departure option.
Okay, thank you, Alderman. Alderman Chester.
I pretty much agree with Alderman Dunn. I think that there's enough there that we could possibly get a small reduction in impact, and therefore to explore it makes sense. To put it off the table doesn't make sense to me. Even a small marginal benefit is well worth the investment from my point of view. So displaying supports RNAV. The continued research of RNAV, I would be a better way of putting it.
Okay, Mayor Jersney. Mayor?
Are you muted?
Hello? Mayor Jersney?
Hold on.
Oh, there you are.
Sorry. Okay, I was also in favor of RNAV as well. But if the majority goes with just the runway rotation, can we come back to examine RNAV as well as the other runways that will be available, which we have to come back to anyway?
I'm sorry, Mary, you kind of broke up there and I missed the important part of the question. Could you repeat it?
I'm in support of RNAV, but if the majority goes without RNAV to get some the runway rotations, can we come back to examine RNAV within a reasonable amount of time, and along with the other runways that we have to look at, which is the way north and the way south runways? Could we come back to it?
I suppose this committee, before they make any official recommendation to the full ONCC and before the CDA submits a final program to the FAA, it's your purview to go back and look at anything if there's a vote to go back and re-examine RNAV.
Would it drag it out more?
Yeah, it would. Yeah, it would lengthen.
As opposed to just looking and examining it now, correct?
I believe so, yeah. I believe if we look at it now and include it in alternative development for this committee to deliberate, as opposed to going back in a few months from now and looking at it, that will lengthen the amount of time this committee will have to recommend a program. Because we still have quite a bit of work to do on refining these procedures. And so any of that work can either start now, or if we have to go back, it'll just lengthen the amount of time later.
Thank you, Ryan. Aaron is next.
Good morning, everyone. Chairman, just a couple of reminders. I want to pick up on a couple of comments that Ryan mentioned. So for everyone on the committee, remember that there are two principal elements of the Fly Quiet program today that we desire to review and perhaps update. One of those is preferential flight tracks. And if you think about the Fly Quiet manual, that's the page with the headings and the blue stripe on the side. And we're contemplating whether we do, whether we keep headings or we switch to a more refined departure path, which would be something on the order of RNAV. I think the goal for you today is to make a decision. We have looked at RNAV paths at multiple airports. We had a really successful meeting in Bensonville a while back where, you know, Landerman Brown presented examples from 10 to 15 different airports. And this is the concept of, should the planes fly on a rail, to coin a term, versus, you know, are you in favor of dispersion? Now remember, the concepts that we originally prepared for you and showed on a slide for 4 left and 2 left departures, those were a first step. As Ryan mentioned, we have additional work to do at the request of the FAA. The FAA has not fully vetted those concepts. They've given us initial feedback. We need to make tweaks before we illustrate those again and come back to you. Now, that being said, you know, even if we proceed with RNAV, it's important for you to realize that while that improves the accuracy of the flight path, there will always be dispersion, right? It's not 100%, but if we want to concentrate the flights in order to improve accuracy and predictability, RNAV is a way to do that. Of course, we've always talked about the counter argument is, you know, for the homes under that flight path, they may get an extra share of flights. And so it really goes back to this concept of concentrating the flights versus dispersing the flights. So again, that goes back to the original Fly Quiet element of preferential flight tracks. The other primary aspect of Fly Quiet is preferential runways. And that is, do we have a set amount of nighttime noise abatement runways and they never change except in some pattern, or do we in fact rotate the pattern? So today, I think we're not concentrating on the rotation pattern. That's still a major element to be proposed, and we'll come back to you in future meetings. But today, we just want you to concentrate on preferential flight tracks. Again, Ryan is correct. We need your affirmation that you want us to continue working on this. For the CDA and Landerman Brown and the FAA to really dive into this, vet this thoroughly, and come back to you with fully baked concepts, we need an affirmation that this is worthwhile. Otherwise, we're going to keep spinning our wheels. Chairman, that's all I have.
All right, thank you. Ernie, you're next, then Cynthia, then Trustee Klug.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Aaron, I agree with you 100%. I think we need to make a decision on, before we worry about RNAV, which I'm actually a supporter of, and I think everybody knows that. I think there's a place for it, especially when at nighttime operations, when we can implement it, which I think everybody would agree, we can't implement during the daytime. All right. And if I'm mistaken in that, I would welcome somebody to tell me that. Having said that, I think we need to come to a determination of what, and Joe, I'm sorry, I know I'm going to go back on it, which you asked me not to do, but
30 seconds.
Before, I'll give you 5 seconds. Before we decide on whether or not to make a command of going down the road of telling Landerman Brown and the CDA of deciding whether or not we want RNAV, I think we need to decide on which runways we're using. and you know, there has been discussion of, and the facts are there that, you know, on our best day, when we use the diagonals, we're only using them 50% of the time. And I honestly don't think it's going to get any better than that. So before we put a workload on people of saying, give me an RNAV, and Ryan, I'll throw this out to you. if we started today, if you started today and the FAA started today, how long will it be before we get an RNAV solution? I know the answer to the question, but I'll throw it out to you anyway.
Ryan, don't answer that. So, question. It's a good question, but we can't predict that for you because the duration of the work is very much tied to the complexity of the request, right? If we're only doing RNAV for one runway out of a possible 6, versus we're doing RNAV for multiple runways with multiple pathways, the complexity is commensurate. And so it's difficult to predict that.
Yes, Aaron, I agree with you. And that's why I asked the question. So, at best, it's not tomorrow, right? At best, it's a year down the road, right? And I'll answer my own question. At best is 12 months from now. The work is tremendous to try to do that. I mean, I know it. I know what it is. And I'm not the person who's going to do it. I'm not the FAA. But I would hate to ask the FAA to go down and try to figure out an RNAV procedure for 2 runways, right? And then come back and go, we didn't want to use those runways anyway. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm finished.
Okay, Ernie, if I could just make a quick comment, and it's probably unfair, but I suspect if we asked FAA to do anything, it would take months anyway. So if we asked them to do something, I don't think they would immediately start on it because that's the way it's been in the past. Having said that, that was just my comment. You can do with what you want. Cynthia, you're next. Cynthia?
Hello, I'm sorry, I was on mute. I would echo Ernie's comments about the timeline, but also break that into, if the committee is going to look at RNAV for the diagonals, they really should look at RNAV for the entire airport and give it the best effort and not piecemeal it, because there is time associated with it, regardless of whether you do, well, obviously it grows if you do 1 runway versus 6, but our experience with the timeline of implementation is it takes a lot of time. The noise evaluation is critical, and we've experienced successes and we've experienced failures. Our firm most often gets called in on the noise problems that occur after the EIS. So there's benefit to gain, but the noise analysis is critical to gain that. And you oftentimes move some of your concerns further out from the runway because that's where those communities are benefiting from the dispersion. You take that dispersion away with RNAV, so you 2, 3, 4 miles out, communities are experiencing acute rail of traffic over their head that they are not used to. And that's where we get called in. And that may be fine if you can place that rail of traffic over an industrial area or a traffic corridor. But if it involves residences, we experience a high level of frustration at much lower DNLs than the significant thresholds of the EIS would predict.
Cynthia, if you'd look at my motion, there's a general request. There wasn't a specific request at particular runways. That's my understanding.
Well,
Joe,
I think
if I could chime in here, we would need specific runways.
Ultimately, I understand that, but the question here is whether we're going to pursue RNAV or not. It's not, are we going to pursue RNAV on diagonals? Are we going to pursue it on a particular parallel? The question today is, are we going to pursue RNAV? That's my understanding.
What is it?
Are we going to look into the use of RNAV, period?
Well, then the next question would be, are we going to use what runway would we look
Yeah,
at?
that would have to be the next question.
Well,
As much as coming up,
Joe,
Yes.
in regards to the motion, I think what is somewhat of a surprise here is RNAV appears to be the way the chart presents it. It presents that RNAV, the pursuit of RNAV, is going to be in parallel or part of the RRP Fly Quiet 21 effort. My recommendation would be more in line with Harwood Heights, which is separate these efforts and put RNAV out to a future date. It is a very large undertaking. You can simulate that diagonal transportation corridor effort with appropriate vector headings and turn locations without RNAV, and reserve RNAV for a later effort after Fly Quiet 21 is implemented with preferred headings and RRP to then later mature some routes to RNAV.
Cynthia, this will be the last response because we got to move on, but it seems to me that we're just giving them a green light that we're looking for. That RNAV is going to be.
This is Nunzio.
Yeah.
So am I understanding, we only want to do this because Ryan's asking for specific runways. You're making it sound like it's all 6 runways.
It's a general question that has to get specific in the future. But the motion before us is a general request. That's all we're asking for today.
Because Aaron was talking about.
Mayor, and if you vote no, then there is no request ever in the foreseeable future, if ever again, to look at RNAV, because we're going to be going down another road.
See, my understanding, we were looking at all options and picking the runways. Now I heard Aaron say, well, if you're running on a rail, so you're telling me that I'm going to vote on certain residents are going to get bombarded all the time instead of dispersion where, everybody gets some noise and everybody gets some break. I mean, 25% utilization is still better than 0. I'm just trying to get the best outcome possible for our residents. I'm sure Bensonville's trying to do the same thing, and all the other communities are trying to do the same thing. Everybody's going to get some noise, but if
Air Police, it's Aaron. Good morning. Just to clarify, this isn't a vote as to whether you want RNAV in the final proposal for FAA review and approval. All this is we need a decision whether this is effort that the committee wants the CDA and Landerman Brown to continue to study. Right now, there are too many topics in the air, and we haven't settled on a rotation plan. We haven't settled on preferential flight tracks. We're looking for some kind of affirmation that says, yes, keep going with this. So I agree with the chairman. The first question is, are we going to consider RNAV at all for any of the 6 runways that you, the committee, have approved in your criteria? If the answer is yes, we're happy to continue. But know that in including RNAV as part of your updated preferential flight tracks, it adds complexity. Now that complexity may be worth it in the end, complexity to the analysis, okay? But we need to know, this issue, should we keep going to explore it, come back to you with refined concepts as we're doing on the rotation pattern itself, come back in a future meeting, because otherwise we don't want to keep going on all of these multiple efforts and not really finish any one of them. So I agree with the chairman. This is, should we keep going to study the issue of RNAV for 1 or more runways? If the answer is yes, we'll come back in a future meeting and say, all right, let's talk about which runways. And then we would go develop some concepts, and then we come back at a later time and say, okay, you asked us to study RNAV, you asked us to study it for these runways. This is the proposal for your review and approval.
And what are we, so right now, we're not even a specific runway at all, is what you're telling me.
It's my understanding that that's not in the verbiage in the motion that the chairman offered.
Correct.
Mr. Chair,
Dennis, if you would hold on, we have a couple more questions here. Trustee. Trustee?
I'm sorry, I lost you. Are you there?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, there you are. Okay.
Very good. Thank you, Chairman. It's a very, very complex issue for me, but what I'm thinking about, if we do not do the RNAV right now and vote yes, the CDA and the FEA are going to come back later and say, you know what, you didn't want it, why should we entertain it again and spend all the money? So I think in risking them not helping us in the future, we should do it now. We need all the information to make good choices. That's just what Schiller Park thinks.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Karen?
Thank you. Just a few comments. I know Ernie didn't have the benefit of being on the committee back at the beginning, but we did evaluate which runways should be included in a rotation program. We took that vote, we included the diagonals. I know 50% or less isn't ideal, but I also think it's more than we would get if we didn't include them at all. So I do think it's important we continue to include the diagonals and move forward under the direction that the committee gave previously. In regards to RNAV, I have concerns that I understand no runways are being included in the motion, but Schaumburg is not supportive of RNAV on the parallel runways. I think that this committee, we've hit some stumbling blocks along the way. I think we need to be moving forward so that we can bring these discussions to a resolution. I think that what I have heard at noise conferences that I've been at is that RNAV works well when you have large bodies of water that you can navigate over, but near residential, even if you're going over a forest preserve or a highway, you still have residential adjacent, is problematic for those residents that are impacted. And so I think for that reason, Schaumburg's not going to be supporting moving forward with RNAV as part of this process. Thank you.
All right. If there isn't any other discussion, I'd like somebody to make the motion.
Mr. Chairman? Mr.
Yes.
Chairman? Yes. Hi, Frank here from City of Chicago 41. You mind if I bring up a couple of points real quick?
Frank,
no, Frank, this is the perfect time.
You're on the committee, so I can't allow you just to speak.
That's why I'm asking.
No, yes, I can't allow you to speak in this discussion because you're not part of the committee. You don't represent the committee. We have somebody, Jeanette, don't we have somebody else from the City of Chicago on the board?
We have Peter Bialik. The comments for the audience is at the end of the meeting. You had mentioned any ONCC members that had comments at the beginning of the meeting.
I'm sorry, Frank. I know you got some good questions, and we can hear them at the end.
Well, it's an observation, Joe. It's not even something that anyone has to answer. But if you would just consider, okay, this is not communist China or North Korea. If you just consider,
it is Robert's rules.
I know, but we're talking about selecting. You guys are going to vote on RNAV or the rail, as Aaron says. My point is,
no, to be clear, all they're asking you to vote is whether to keep studying RNAV. This is not a decision to vote on whether RNAV should be in the final proposal for FAA review and approval.
I heard
okay,
that.
Well, all I'm going to say is there are some communities that have not benefited from sound insulation, and the sound contours were all put in effect, assuming the rail or the direction of the runways. That's all I wanted to say.
All right, thank you, Frank. Do I hear a motion? Do I hear somebody make a motion for this?
I'll move so, Mr. Chairman.
I'll second.
Mr. Chair, restate the motion, please.
Flight Quiet Committee of ONCC requests that the City of Chicago Department of Aviation pursue further study of RNAV departure concepts to include as a possible option for consideration as part of a Fly Quiet 21 plan.
Your internet's down?
That's basically it, okay?
Hold on. It looks like Karen just got kicked out of the meeting. Is she back yet?
Karen?
We've lost Karen.
You're correct, Evan. She did. She left the meeting. I don't know that she actually decided to leave
No, she
or.
just texted me. She got kicked out. The last thing she heard was communist Korea.
Sorry, I don't mean to laugh, but it is funny.
All right, you heard the motion. It was seconded. Jeanette, you want to call the roll?
Your internet's off? No.
Joe, I think we have to wait for Karen to come back in order
She's
to
back on
do
her
that.
phone. Karen, are you with us? Karen, are you in there?
I'm back, yeah.
Okay.
All right. You want to do a voice vote? Let's do it.
Okay today?
No, we have to do a roll call.
Yes.
There's someone else that doesn't have their phone muted and is having another conversation. Okay. So there was a motion and a second. Dennis, you made the motion. Who seconded the motion?
I did from Des Plaines.
Alderman Chester. The roll call is Bensonville,
No.
City of Chicago 39th Ward,
Yes.
Des Plaines,
Yes.
Elmhurst,
Yes.
Harwood Heights,
Yes.
Niles, Joe,
Yes.
Park Ridge,
No.
River Grove,
Yes, I think we should keep all options on the table.
Schaumburg,
No.
Schiller Park, Trustee Klug, Trustee Klug, yes, no? He may have frozen. Wooddale,
No.
Wooddale, no. Trustee Klug, Schiller Park, yes or no?
Oh, Jeanette?
Yes. Oh,
Hi, Schiller
yes.
Park. We lost your connection. I'm sorry.
Is that a yes or a no?
Yes, it's a yes.
So we have 3 no's, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 7 yeses and 1, 2, 3, 4 no's. The motion passes.
Thank you, Jeanette. Again, let me remind everybody that doesn't mean we're going to have RNAV on any runway in particular. Just means it's giving the CDA and FAA a go ahead to look into it a little bit further. I'd like to take this opportunity to tell you about a letter that the ONCC received from the Suburban O'Hare Commission. It's from Mayor Johnson, the chairman of Suburban O'Hare Commission. What I'd like to do is put this particular letter into the record, and I'd just like to give you a summary of what the record says, what the letter says, and if you'd like to discuss it further, let Jeanette know. The summary of this letter from him, representing the Suburban O'Hare Commission, is this. He has 4 points he wants to make sure everybody understands. The first point is uphold the November 15th, 2018 adopted fly quiet criteria, maintain the use of all runways in the RRP throughout all seasons, pair north diagonal runway departure weeks with long north runway, and pair south diagonal departure weeks with long south runways. Defer RNAV analysis to a later date when the CDA and the FAA can analyze RNAV for all runways and determine if the potential benefits outweigh the risks. That was the 4 things he would like the committee to consider. And like I said, Jeanette, could you make this letter part of the record?
Yes, I will do so.
Okay, thank you. Our next meeting for the Fly Quiet Committee is scheduled for May 22nd at a location at 9:30 in the morning at a location to be determined depending upon how coronavirus treats us, I suppose. I can't make a joke about that. That's not funny. Comments from the audience? I think Suzanne Carbon wanted to say something. I've gotten. You there, Suzanne?
I am, just was unmuting. Thank you, Chairman. I wanted just to make a comment in regards to the RNAV. While I am not adverse to looking into studying it, in hearing what Ryan had to say and Aaron, it seems to me that if that goes that direction, and that's been voted on, that is the direction going, it's a roller coaster that's going to go, that's not going to stop. And I think that will be that will end up being the main direction that we go. I'm going to be one of those individuals that's going to be in the concentrated rail of noise by RNAV. And being in the city of Chicago, I know that there are we have the largest population areas. I'm wondering, Chairman, and Ryan, if you're going to investigate that, I'm wondering if the committee can at least provide some specific components that they'd like investigation on in regards to how the noise dispersion, how many people will be affected, because I think that they need to look at population as the woman in Karen, I'm sorry, I think in Schaumburg, how that will affect the disbursement. City of Chicago has the most population of individuals. We have 3 wards. There's a 39th, the 41st, and I can't think of the other one off the top of my head. But I'd like to know how, if when they're looking into this committee, Aaron, if you could kind of find out how these areas are going to be affected based on population, like what will the disbursement be if you do RNAV versus the various flight tracks, because I think for the most part the committee has really not done anything about noise complaints. So let's look at population. How's that going to be affected? That's basically what I want to say in a not clear way, but thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. Frank, I guess you're next. I suppose as a citizen and not as a representative of your ward, because you have a chance to speak in the beginning.
Well, I am a representative of the ward and
I know you
citizen. And a citizen. Thank you. I'll show you my naturalization papers. I'd like to refer back to Ryan Anderson's presentation, the frame where he said that the virus has dramatically reduced the number of overnight flights, and it was a very graphic representation of what is possible. Now, on the minutes of the previous meeting, it was a little misrepresented what I was proposing. I was not asking, that we close the airport or do any such thing. I was asking, and I'll go back to asking the CDA to negotiate with the airlines along the same lines as Evan was saying. Let's negotiate with the diagonals. I would like to see the CDA negotiate with the airlines to voluntarily shift some of those operations before the beginning and after the end of the normal fly quiet time. It's a request. It's not a demand. We're not going to close down the airport, but we've all seen what this hideous virus has done. It has let people sleep at night. That's indisputable. And I think we have a demonstration of it right now. We're living it real time. If the CDA can pursue this and negotiate with the airlines and the carriers, the freight haulers, to shift those operations just a few hours before and after the critical time or the fly quiet time, I think it would go a very long way and help us all. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. I noticed my the internet with me. So Karen, get something at a moment's notice when I freeze or whatever is going to happen next. We have one more comment from Frank Galliardo. Frank?
I'm sorry, I had to turn on my mic.
Looks like it.
I'm Frank Gagliardi. I live in the 41st Ward, directly under a runway path that would turn into a rail at some point. There's always that possibility. And it keeps getting closer. Now, it may or may not happen. But I think I could speak for everybody who lives in a home underneath an approach or a departure lane or potential future rail. It's just not a good idea. RNAV. And I'm sorry you voted the way you did. The sooner it's killed, the better, as far as I'm concerned. And that's all I want to say today. Thank you.
Thank you. If there are not any more comments from the audience, I'd like to make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
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 Anyone opposed? All right, everybody. I think we did a great job for our first meeting like this. I'm really proud of you all. And thank you for attending, and I'll see you next month.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Joe.
Thank you, Jeanette.